Welcome to the Coast and Podcast, bringing you timely insights and strategies to succeed in the ever-evolving world of school system technology. On each episode, you'll hear from certified education technology leaders, visionary district change makers, and instructional experts who will discuss the technology topics making a difference in schools today. And now, enjoy today's show. Going from sight to vision. How do we make that transition in our school districts? Data is a key element. When used correctly, data helps our learning environments to be more personalized, more human, not less. And it really gives us the vision to see our goals within reach, how we're progressing, and what we need to do next. This episode of the COSM Podcast is presented by PowerSchool, and we're going to be diving into these topics. I'm your host, Ross Romano, and today I'm chatting with Dr. Mary Levinsohn-Klyap, Director of Data Literacy and Coaching for Howard County Public Schools in Maryland. Mary has served in various leadership roles in the district over the past 20 years, and in her current position, she collaborates with school-based and system leaders to support the effective and strategic use of data. Perfect guest for this topic today. Mary, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
So one of the first things that stands out to me when we talk about data and we talk about all the various ways you want to use data effectively in your districts is that, in your role in particular, you could be tremendously valuable in making meaning of all that data, right? We have all these tools that deliver just more data than we ever had before, and it probably increases every single year. And it can be tremendously valuable and help us do all the things we want to do as a district, as long as each person and each individual role who is leveraging that data really understands what the data is telling them, what it's maybe not, or what should we use this for and what should we maybe not worry about, right? Can you just talk just a little bit about that in your role with data literacy and coaching, where you are really helping to just interpret that data and also work with all the various stakeholders who are using it in their roles? How important is that middle part to make sure that we are making the best use of that data?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really think that the most important thing is to connect it with what makes sense in your system. So you really have to, we've got the accountability in terms of like what the state and what the districts are really requiring for us. But then what's at our core in terms of, what do we value and what's really going to be important for us to help our teachers and help our staff and help our school leaders really maximize and do what's best for kids. And so what I found is that random data points for people can be really frustrating and really unhelpful for people. And especially if data isn't your thing. There's some educators where like they love data, it's their thing. And there's some who really, they're afraid of data and it makes them anxious. And so I read a book once called Switch, which is about like kind of how do we strategically and easily help people make changes in their lives. And one of the things that Switch talks about is this idea of shrink the change. So it's like, instead of it being like huge and like a million data points, like what's the one or two things that you really need to focus on with that person, with that stakeholder as you're collaborating to help them make sense, and then really focus on what makes sense for them. So I'll give you an example, and I've got lots, but here's one that comes to mind. So if I'm a middle school English language arts teacher, okay, so maybe naturally I'm not super into data. I'm a 7th grade English teacher, and I've got a really heterogeneous group of kids. I've got great readers, I've got hesitant readers, I've got kids right in the middle. And for me, as that teacher, like what makes sense? What data would make sense for me to really help those students really excel and help me really, as a teacher, meet their instructional needs and meet them where they are? So a dashboard that might make sense and something that we use in our district is where we have a couple of different data points linked together. So in our district, we use an assessment called MAP, where it's a reading and math assessment. We also have our state assessment. We also have grades. And then we also look at our kids in terms of, are they on grade level? Are they below grade level? Are they excelling? Are they above? And really looking at those data points. So helping that teacher look at those data points together to see, do I have students in here who are marked as on grade level, but wow, they're really like blowing it out of the water in terms of how they're testing on MAP. And oh my goodness, look at last year, they got all A's. and they did really well in the state assessment. So we're looking at a couple different data points. Maybe this is a student that I should look at for acceleration or for additional rigorous opportunities or whatever. And then looking at it the other way, like, are there students who are, again, like marked as that on grade level, but like we haven't identified them and they're really kind of bombing out in all these other data points that, again, it's right there at a snapshot on our dashboard. Are there additional things that we need to put in place in the classroom for that student? Do I need to collaborate with our student support team to kind of like get some ideas for resources or supports or interventions for that particular kid? So it's kind of a long way of saying, what makes sense, if I'm a classroom teacher, what makes sense for all those different data points to help me make my job be more efficient so that I can really do my job. And one of the things that we talk about in our system is educators, their jobs are hard enough. So how do we as a system, like, so in my role and other people in central office, how do we kind of remove those barriers so that data is no longer the barrier? And data is the easy part. And then that way, at a glance, it makes sense to the stakeholder so that they can then do their job.
And one of the things that's often true of data is, the connotations we all have with it. And whether we're somebody who considers ourselves a little less comfortable with data or somebody who really loves it, right? It sometimes can feel very technical. It might be called personal data, and yet it sometimes can feel like it's representing somebody as not quite a person, or at least not a holistic person, right? But in reality, there's those combination of factors. There's that qualitative data, the things we see with our eyes that can't necessarily be represented on a dashboard, but also there's all these various things that our tools, our technologies allow us to see more deeply or more clearly that we would miss without them. And those ways can really help to create even stronger relationships between teachers and students, to really personalize and individualize, because it allows a teacher who has many, many students that they're teaching and observing, and they're coming to their own understanding of them. But then there's all these things that it's impossible to pick up on all of it, right? Without having some source of data and the tools that really help us. Are there particular ways in your district that your data has helped you better kind of quote unquote see your students? What are a couple of examples of how the data that you use and the data that you're working with has helped you understand your students better?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think what you said makes a lot of sense, really looking at those multiple data points together and looking at both quantitative and qualitative data points. It makes sense to kind of connect things with a system level focus. So we have a system level focus, again, like having data that makes sense. We have a system focus, and many districts do, on equity. And so what we've done, we've worked closely with our DEI office. There's a equity framework that originally comes from ASCD that we've really been using in our system. And there are 4 elements within it. Belonging is one of them. And what we've done is we've created kind of a suite of dashboards within Who Knew It, which is our data dashboard system, to say, okay, well, if we think belonging is important, which we do, and we know that belonging is, a critical element to student success, then how do we kind of make that from sort of this murky kind of pie in the sky kind of ambiguous thought and make it more concrete and more actionable and more objective? And so together with our awesome research office, we've, kind of worked together and collaborated to say, okay, if belonging is up here, what are the different elements or the indicators that help us know if belonging is happening? And again, thinking back to, at the end of the day, we want to know, does Johnny feel belonging? Does Sally feel belonging in the classroom? Does Mrs. Jones feel belonging, as a staff member in the school? And so, really kind of leaning on that framework to say, okay, others have done work around belonging. How do we, make that more actionable? So for example, within our dashboards, we have a variety of dashboards that we believe really kind of tap into that idea of belonging. And in a sense, it's both qualitative and quantitative data points. So in our state, we do a climate survey, a state level climate survey, and our data warehouse office, they're amazing, and they pull those data from the state and have that available within the belonging suite. So it's a one-stop shop. If a principal and their equity team or their school improvement team are kind of sitting together, to kind of make a better sense of belonging, help understand, kind of what's belonging look like at my school, then they can look at those different elements within the climate survey. They can also pull dashboards that we've kind of collaborated with others in the system to help to be developed that look at, for example, racial and ethnic representation of students of teachers compared to the student population. So, for example, at my particular school, if there's 20% African American and 10% Asian students, does the teacher population, the grown-up population, does it reflect that? So that, again, do the students have opportunity to see people who look like them? And we have dashboards that at a glance, just at a click, that school leaders can look at and kind of parse around.
I know there was also a recent white paper put out in which you were speaking about belonging as well. So it kind of is an indication, right? That's something that is typically kind of intangible. It's a soft skill or a feeling that, of course, identifying those factors and then putting measurements around them doesn't achieve everything you want to achieve, but it really does help you to say, okay, what kind of progress are we making toward this in a way in which we are able to exercise intentionality around it, right? Versus typically, you may be in a case where, okay, we're sort of trying to create an environment that we believe will help our students, our faculty feel as though they belong, and then it will self-report later on whether or not they felt belonging, and they may or may not all have a consistent definition of what that even means. Right? But it would limit your ability to put strategies in place and to adjust your approaches to say, okay, we want to improve in these areas. And so I think that's just kind of a powerful illustration of the potential of what data can do in different ways. Are there particular ways in which your perspective on data has evolved in your career? Maybe it's as a result of just the different types of data you've used and how your goals and objectives and ambitions have, in the district have changed. Maybe also just a result of different tools that have become available.
Yeah. So I would say that back when I was school-based, I feel like I was much more, because my training is as a school psychologist. And so as a school psychologist, we're very much trained around measurement and like how to measure learning, how to measure behavior, social, emotional, things like that. So I feel like I was definitely more kind of a little bit rigid in, how you're going to work with people and how, like data being the end all be all. And I think what I've kind of evolved over my time in my district is, really having to listen to the stakeholder and what is it that's important to them. And then recognizing that in that collaborative consultation, helping figure out how to make something that is really kind of hard to measure more measurable. So I do believe that pretty much anything could be measured and it may not be perfect, but, I think that's, I guess if I were to give advice to people trying to move forward in some of this work or guidance, it would be that really listening to your stakeholder, and whether it's a principal, whether it's a school leader, whether it's the superintendent, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a parent, and what's the essence of what it is that they are trying to, what is that baseline, how to make that objective. And so really asking those, like, what's it look like? What's it feel like, to try and make it more observable and measurable. I think it also helps to know what the different data points that are available are, and don't be afraid to ask questions, like as a leader myself. For example, we were looking at special education and how to help move our special education services, from point A to point B. And it's like, oh, well, we know that students have IEP goals and we know that there's assessments that happen with students, but it's like those data sometimes are in different places. And so not being afraid to ask, okay, well, maybe if we were to pull all those different data points into one place, then it can really help to make that information more accessible to people. And I guess the other piece is that really developing those collaborative relationships. None of us can do this work in a vacuum. and it's a lot of work to do, and we all care deeply about education. So I've been so incredibly lucky to be able to work really collaboratively with our research office, with our data warehouse office, with people who oversee curriculum and oversee the administrators, because each of us has kind of like a different spin on things, but none of us can, kind of plow through and get this work done alone. Like if you're just trying to measure one thing, it's like, oh, okay, I just want to look at how kids are doing with grades. That's fine. But if you're really trying to have data be actionable across the system, you really have to have all those different system people to be able to work together to figure that out together.
Today's podcast is brought to you by PowerSchool, the leading provider of cloud-based K-12 software in North America. From instruction, learning, grading, and attendance to assessments, analytics, and talent management, only PowerSchool brings all of your technology together to support student success. Learn how to unlock your PowerSchool potential at powerschool.com. I often think about when I'm sort of evaluating any different forms of data, like what is and what is not included in this data, right? What is this showing and indicating and telling us, and what, how does that indicate either our progress, our success, or what we should do next? And then also what's not here that is either something we may want to find out, we want to get some more data on, find another tool, or, at the very least, what are the things we should not try to extrapolate from this, right? So that we're not trying to overuse or overgeneralize and apply data for something that it's not. And it's important to ask both of those things, because then once you kind of identify, all right, what's not included in this data set, you may say, oh, but we can find that. We just need to ask the right questions or find the right tool. And that's, of course, I'm sure in many cases how your approach has evolved to say, okay, we didn't previously have data on these elements of belonging, right? But now we can, but we do think we know what some of those factors are. So we can put together an approach that can help us get a lot closer to an understanding, and it'll really help us progress. So those things are so important. How do you think about over the past 2-3 years now, that there's been a lot of particular challenges that schools have grappled with, things that certainly affect every element of what schools do, everything from students' well-being, social emotional development, academic achievement, the way teachers are going to plan and execute instruction. When you think about the data culture you have created and are creating, and how that is designed to support instruction and student achievement amid those challenges, what are there particular things that you've paid close attention to, addressed, adjusted? Are there specific ways in which you feel as though the work that you had done prior, even though nobody could have exactly anticipated what's happening now, said, oh, this set us up for success because we had put these elements into place, we had good tools. I mean, what are the things that you're really paying close attention to and addressing as you just continue to establish your culture?
That's a great question. Yeah, the past 2 years have been it's been really unique for educators. And I'm not going to lie, we're just like everybody else, where we're just, trying to do our very, very best by our kids and by our staff and by our teachers, who are just amazing and going above and beyond. I think really part of it is, again, that flexibility and really listening to the stakeholder and, what is it that they really need? And I guess also having those really helpful collaborative relationships with our different offices. So for example, when we first shut down, in March, like everybody else did, one of our very first things that we were trying to do, there's a lot of things people were trying to do, but one of the things that I was really involved with helping do is, working with our student services office, working with our administrators, and working with our data warehouse team and our research office to make sure that we haven't lost any kids. So it's we took our 2-week break, and then everybody went back onto virtual instruction. And so, everybody's like getting their instruction over the computer from their teachers. And we had a way of being able to, our data office was able to kind of determine were kids like logging in and kind of pinging in, and we couldn't tell like, was what they were doing terrific on there? Were they participating? But at least like, were they turning on the computer? And as like a very first step, like sort of at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, it's like, are they okay? Like, is every kid accounted for? And that was just at least a proxy for being able to do that. And for the kids that haven't logged in at all, then we were able to deploy our pupil personnel workers, basically our school social workers, to go out and make sure that kids were, accounted for. And all of that had to happen, in sort of like this tremendous effort, because going to virtual instruction and pulling those data to ensure that kids were, logging on and all that wasn't something that had been created before. So all those different offices, we had to like operationalize it, be like, okay, how do we know that this is happening? And then collaborate with our data warehouse office to be like, can you please help us like create a dashboard so that at a glance we'll know if our kids are okay? And they, of course, were just like right on it, drop everything and make sure that we've got a way to do it. And, within record time, blam, this dashboard is created so that any teacher, any principal, any leader could like click into it and see, okay, who have we missed and who's there? I mean, I really feel it's almost like this Apollo 13 moment where it's like, okay, everybody's got to do this right now. We've all got to pull together, which everybody did. But I feel that since we had like those structures in place, and we had those relationships, and it's not like we were calling up these different offices for the first time. It's like we were all kind of used to working together. That really helped. I guess that's an example of like something that we really had to do like right out of the box or right out of the gate. And I guess like the other thing, it's like with the data piece, recognizing that, and I mentioned this before and I'll just say it again, just removing those barriers. That data should never be the barrier. Like figuring out if your kids are at school today or, who did well on what assessment, that should never be the barrier. Like that should be a click, really easy to get to. The hard work is, okay, oh my goodness, I've got these 6 kids that are really failing. What do I need to do to differentiate and pull supports into place to help those children? Or, oh my goodness, like what's going on with my science office? I really need to look differently at what's going on with my science instruction or whatever. And so I feel like part of what we've needed to do is be creative about what's the support look like, that's going to really best meet the end user's needs. If it's an individual Google Meet session that I need to just set up with a counselor just so that they feel comfortable being able to like pull the data for their school, I'll do that. If it's like office hours, we'll do that. If it's creating little little step-by-step on a PowerPoint, we'll do that. Just so that the data part isn't the barrier. We want people to be able to be creative and do their hard work without data getting in the way.
For various different reasons, some of our listeners will not be as far along in their, quote unquote, data journey as you and your district are. Maybe they're new to their role. And even though they're familiar with data in different contexts, they're in a new role where they're utilizing or coaching others on data use in different ways. Maybe the districts have put a plan into place that they're working on executing, but everybody at every level of instruction isn't yet completely onboarded. Whatever the reason may be, is there any, and this is kind of how we're going to close here, if there's any particular group or kind of audience within that ecosystem that you feel like we haven't yet had a chance to address directly yet, and you just sort of want to offer a little bit of advice or encouragement for, okay, if you're at this point on your journey and you're working toward X, what would you kind of advise them on? What are some recommendations based on, of course, your experience that you think are some kind of important elements for them to take a close look at?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would start by saying that collaboration is the key. And really having the right people on the bus. And when I say the right people, I'm thinking both about content skills, so people who have that content knowledge, as well as where they are in the organization. And I'll give you a really specific example. I think it's really important, critically important, to have some of the technical people. So in our district, it's the people who are in the data warehouse office. They're the ones who develop Who Knew It, like take our Who Knew It data package and customize it for us. So I think it's critically important to have at least somebody or somebody's from that technical office in close contact with staff who have a clear vision of what the end users need and have a clear understanding of the system goals. And so, for example, in our district, we've got, somebody from the data warehouse office, plus somebody who oversees all the principals. So like somebody who's really clear on, what the principals need, plus a leader from curriculum, and then somebody who's like kind of oversees student services. So like the psychologists and counselors, and somebody who can kind of work between all of those people to help hear what those needs are and sort of translate, sometimes have that translate between those different groups. And that's kind of where I see myself falling. Like that's in my role as the data literacy and coaching. I kind of listen to the technical people or work with the technical people, but then also work with the content people. And sometimes I feel like I'm a sort of like a liaison or like a translator amongst all those people. I'm not technical and I'm not a school-based person, but I can kind of speak technicalese and I can speak schoolese enough to be able to translate between those groups. Not to say that they don't amongst each other, but it's helpful to have somebody who it's my dedicated job to do this. And it's like, I'm paid to love this stuff and I would love it anyway, but it's like, it's helpful to have somebody who kind of can do that work and move that work forward. I think it's also important to keep in mind that data is a tool and it's helpful to have a process in place to help the data come to life. For example, what we did, our research office in collaboration with my office developed a data protocol that we call Data Dive in 25, affectionately named, because we know that in the schools, their planning time is about 30 minutes. And so, if we're asking teachers or teams or principals to do data conversations, they probably don't have more than 30 minutes to do it. So we're like, okay, 25 rhymes with dive. We'll go with that. So it's like data dive in like 25 minutes. And that's something that we have developed, and it tightly aligns with our dashboard. So, we've got a data conversation about PSAT scores, and there's a data dive in 25 kind of protocol, like a one pager that kind of goes right along with that. So having some kind of, and not that people need to use that process, but having some kind of process in place and like a structure and we've developed a data calendar, like again, some tools to help people. So it's not just sort of all this random dashboards that it's like, you don't even know where to start to give it some structure. And again, what we talked earlier about that shrink the chain. So it's not like so much in the universe. It's just like here's where you start. It's October. The map data is new in October. You should be looking at your map data. And here's your one pager with your data conversations. And then here's the dashboard that you would click into to have that conversation. So I think that process piece is really important. I think the collaboration is really important. And if you can have a staff member like myself to kind of be the person who is paid to care about it and to paid to like pull these people together to make sure that the dashboards are what the system cares about, then I think that helps as well.
Thank you so much, Mary, for being a part of this episode. I think it's clear, it's come through that your experience and your expertise is tremendously valuable as we really work on digesting and just continuing to refine and improve every day our approaches to data use, which is just so critical at every level of our instruction.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure. And thank you to our listeners. Make sure to check out our recent and upcoming episode so you'll hear conversations about building a diverse technology team, the future of hybrid work, and much, much more. We'll catch up with you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the COSN Podcast, produced in partnership with MindRocket Media Group. Visit mindrocketmediagroup.com to connect with our expert team and learn how we can support your education industry, communications, and marketing goals. And to make sure you never miss an episode of the podcast, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. You can also listen to each new episode on edcircuit.com or cosin.org.